It is. I'm just going to let all the attendees auto-populate. It takes sometimes a minute when we start for everybody to fill in the room. I'm just going to give everyone a second to get in here. One more minute. All right. I am going to kick us off. It is now 2:01, and then others can filter in as we go. Awesome. So good afternoon on my end. I know Jeff, you're in Texas, and Mike, you're in California, so we're all in different time zones. Thank you both for joining me, and thank you everybody for attending this afternoon's webinar. Our topic is on defending your law firm from cyber threats, the latest tactics and AI trends. And this discussion grew out of a conversation that I had with one of our law firm clients who said, well, it's not going to happen to me. And that made me take pause and panic and really realize this is a topic that we need to discuss amongst the legal community. So really quickly, I will go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Katherine Doble. I am the founder and president of Ingage. We are a legal and financial nonprofit and government marketing law firm. We serve as outside marketing teams for our clients, managing everything from public relations, public affairs, crisis, which does in some incidences happen to delve into, we've been hacked, and down to social media management. I am going to turn it over now to Jeff. And Jeff, if you could please introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Jeff Baker. I'm the Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of Socium Solutions. We are a cybersecurity firm based out of Houston, focus on a variety of industries, oil and gas, obviously, because we're in Houston, but we've got healthcare, we've got several other verticals that we support. Everything really from risk assessment through incident response. So very much looking forward to the conversation here.
Awesome. And Mike, if you can introduce yourself.
Absolutely. So I'm Mike Zweiback, and I'm a founder of the Zweiback, Fiset, and Zalwendo law firm in Los Angeles. Also the former chief of cybersecurity in the U.S. Attorney's Office. Our practice focuses on government investigations. We have a particular expertise in cyber incident response, and also litigation in court of cybersecurity related issues.
Awesome. Thank you both. And thank you both for being here. When I realized how important the topic was, my PowerPoint just crashed. I'll just keep us going while it reloads. When I realized how important the topic, the need for this discussion, you were the two that first came to mind. So I want to thank you both for taking the time and being here with us this afternoon. So the first question that I have here as this reloads is, how serious, as I mentioned, this firm said it's never going to happen to me. So the first question is, how serious are cyber threats to my law firm? And I'm going to let Jeff, you take that question on first. How serious should law firms take cyber threats?
Sure. I think really any organization should take it seriously. If you think of, to address Katherine's, the question she was asked, why me? I think there, and we've got them highlighted here, I think there's a handful of reasons somebody might say you. It could be that you're easy target. They're just out there fishing to see what they find. It could be that they have some, particular issue with you or your firm. It could be the clients that you serve. It could just be, access maybe to a list of clients that you may work with. So thinking about it from a few different angles, it may not be that they care so much about you in particular. It may be, or could be, what do you know, or who do you know, or what do you have access to that may make you more interesting. And I'll certainly let Michael chime in as well.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, the thing you need to think about is, what do you have? What information do you have within the network in your law firm environment? You have employee data. You have generally either victim data, client information data. you have patent information, you're involved in forums all over the world for a lot of law firms. And so you have a treasure trove of information that every hacker is going to be interested in.
Great points. Awesome. Thank you so much. So the next question that I kind of ties into this one is, well, sure, okay, these hackers, these bad actors may be interested in my firm because it's not just about me, it's about those that I work with, right? And you know, would my largest client, do I want to go to my largest client and tell them, hey, by the way, we've been hacked and your data has been compromised and all your dirty secrets might be now exposed? Probably not. So what are you guys seeing are the biggest cyber threats right now? I mean, what should we really be concerned about in this moment when it comes to cybercrime? And I'll let Mike, let you take that one first.
Well, let me just say, I mean, the business email compromise schemes where you get wiring instructions and you wire to an account that you believe is a safe account. I mean, those are going on a daily basis, not just in law firms, but in businesses in general. And why is that? We have a lot of vendors as a law firm. We're a small boutique of 15 lawyers, but there's always the attempt to sort of, you know, get us to wire money. And a lot of times the answer in terms of the response should be just pick up the phone and talk to the person on the other side and use an analog method to defeat the attack. But the other thing is that the biggest threats can go all the way from the simple business email compromise. And a couple of years ago, there was also a compromise of a data management database that was so severe. A lot of law firms were using this data management database and putting all of their very important litigation documents into it for purposes of international litigation, very complex litigation, and it contained a lot of patent information. And so when the database itself was compromised with a zero-day exploit, a lot of big law firms had to deal with the fact that they had to go back to their clients and say, oops, and you don't want to be in that position. So the threats run the gambit.
Jeff, did you have a?
Yeah, certainly can bandwagon on the email compromise, and we see it across all clients. It's so easy to, you know, you're effectively, you know, blasting hundreds, thousands of emails, and you're phishing, you know, all different client types. And again, it may or may not be a targeted attack. It could just be randomized, but the ability to fish at scale, and even now with kind of this private equity model of ransom attacks being, you know, funded and sold, and it's really anyone could be coming at you. And it's just, you know, it may not be that your employees are malicious in any way. They could just be trying to be helpful. So a lot of times it's our nicest clients that are getting in trouble because they're just trying to do what they think is the right thing. And with the advance, I know we're going to talk about AI in a little bit, but if you think about traditionally what has exposed email compromise in the past, which could be, you know, improper grammar, you know, punctuation, just some of those standout things that you've possibly been educated on, AI is cleaning a lot of that up. So these compromise attempts are looking a lot more professional. They're looking and sounding like more legitimate emails. So again, to Michael's point, we always will encourage a human step. You know, we'll take technology out of a process, especially for changing things like ACH terms or account information. That's a phone call, and it's a phone call to a number, you know, not a phone call to a number someone provides to you. So you're going back to your Rolodex and intervening with that human step. And again, we'll say if your gut doesn't feel right, you know, then something's probably wrong. So, you know, take a moment, pause. I think in this fast-paced world, again, there's this tendency, if you think about a month close, or a year-end close in accounting world, or certain times of the year that may be busier than normal, that's a perfect time. You know, holidays, people are shopping online, things like that. That's a perfect time to just, you know, maybe have your guard down for a second and miss something. So that's where that, you know, even a higher level of diligence is encouraged, because it really just takes one click. And just for a second here, if you think about your organization investing whatever they may invest in security, we can protect the organization from the outside world to an extent, but if someone from the inside is allowing someone in, that's a much different challenge to try to overcome. So again, I think your people are going to be your biggest defense mechanism, but they've got to be trained and educated, and email is a perfect way to foil that sometimes.
Yeah.
And like, I'm sorry, Catherine, but I just want to
Right.
add something to that because I think Jeff made a very important point because he used the word Rolodex, and we don't hear that often. The fact of the matter is that so much of our vulnerability is our behavior. And the fact is that in this generation of folks who grow up in organizations, they're used to electronic means of communication and validation. And sometimes the most important means of validation are, of course, to look at the Rolodex and go to that phone number that you know is associated with the individual.
Mm-hmm. Right, good point. I was just to say, on Friday when the AT&T hack was announced, every single one of my employees received a text message from a number that was not my cell phone saying that I was at a conference and I needed them to confirm that they had received this text message and it was signed by my name. And but they all started messaging me directly via our internal systems and flagging this to each other. And it, thankfully they all have my actual cell phone and were able to quickly recognize it was me. But I once heard, and to Jeff, you mentioned it, your greatest protection against a cyber threat are your team members, but they're also your greatest weaknesses, right? They're also the one false step, one mistake opens a floodgate.
And if you think of each employee, and it's not a one-to-one relationship between employee and the threat landscape, right? It's not just a person with a computer. It's a person with maybe access to multiple machines, or 1, 2, 3, 4 mobile devices. They could have a desktop, they could have a laptop. So there could be, 2, 3, 4, 5 devices per employee. So that grows exponentially on what you have to protect and defend, and all the different ways that a threat actor could potentially connect with them and create an opportunity in your organization. So it's on the IT side, it is a challenge to help protect and defend that, because you don't always know what devices are participating in the ecosystem. So again, getting control of that. And then I think that training and that constant conditioning of, what feels right. What's a typical text request from Katherine? Does she ever send out a text that says, hey, I need money, or I need a card, or is this a one-off? Just there's some common sense things. And again, like I said, they may be trying to be helpful, but just take a moment, pause, take a breath, and think about, is this normal behavior? Sometimes that can be your greatest defense, and it's a non-technological solution. So
yeah, great. So Stephen Welch, who's in the chat, mentioned that he's seen at least 3 recent Dropbox phishing attacks affecting colleagues. It's a pretty big deal. Yeah, Dropbox is certainly one of those ways that we're utilizing to get into systems. So Jeff, you alluded at the next question, which is the hottest topic. How is AI impacting cyber threats? So there are positives to AI and there are negatives to AI, and I'll let you first kind of outline what the benefits of AI are, as well as the risks.
Sure. So if you're thinking about as an organization matures, there are every device that you have has, or most devices have, some kind of logging capability. That means they're sending out information about themselves to some destination. That could be millions and millions of data points that something or some person would have to churn to or churn through, and we're trying to understand what may be normal behavior versus abnormal. That's nothing a human can do. So AI is able to ingest this information. Again, this may be a little bit more on the mature side of an organization, but if you think about all these solutions, endpoint protection, where your laptop gets infected and sends a note. Well, where does that note go? Who's looking at it? AI can help in those areas. There's a kind of a concept out there referenced as the defender's dilemma. You think of a threat actor, they really have to get it right one time. They just have to figure out what your one weakness is and get it. The organization has to fend against every possible outcome that they can. And AI can help there too. You know, again, you're looking for things that may be abnormal. You may be, you know, whether it's email compromise type things or phishing attacks from, you know, maybe an attack lands positively in Africa, and then your email security system picks up on that feed and says, hey, we're going to be looking for these same types of markers, and we will block things. So AI does have some benefit, but, you know, as we know, that same power and efficiency can help the bad guys get even better at their job. So like I mentioned earlier, the ability to overcome some of the language and grammar and punctuation challenges in an email. If I'm thinking about all the different ways that, you know, I could possibly interrogate like an OpenAI or a ChatGPT and maybe develop some code that hasn't been used before. So there's lots of opportunities, I think, on the bad side as well. And I want Michael to chime in on that. I don't want to take it all, but I think every good benefit has a downside and a risk associated with it as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we've used recently in connection with some of our security vendors is the ability to ingest massive amounts of log data and, you know, analyze in ways that, you know, previously maybe we had to do it by hand or by other tools that weren't as efficient or fast. And so it gets us in a position where we can react a little bit quicker. The one thing I will say is, you know, AI is human-like. It's not human. And so there are certain algorithms that are at play that, you know, hackers are very adaptable, and they can manipulate those tendencies within the AI environment, and then utilize them to their advantage. It's a very tricky issue. The other thing is that, you know, we were just talking in a different context of how in the business email compromise space, you know, you want to pick up the phone and talk to someone. Well, AI is, you know, creating human-like types of tendencies and behaviors. And so the ability to get someone on the phone who maybe you don't really know them, but, you know, a computer could actually be the one who's responding to you at the other end of the phone. So we've seen a couple of business email compromises like that, which are even more sophisticated. And so once you let AI out of the box, it's like a Pandora's box. There's good, there's bad. And so we're just learning to navigate.
Yep. Yep. And maybe just to kind of highlight that when we're talking about the log data for those who may not be as familiar. So we have a client that will ingest roughly, call it 2 million data points per month off of all of their, you know, switches, firewalls, endpoint devices. AI is helpful. It culls that down, helps decide what's a real event that needs a human touch, and we'll get that number down to, you know, 5 or 6 through AI. And again, this is over a period of time, tuning and getting AI a little bit smarter around what's AI or what's abnormal and normal. But we can turn 2 million events down into 5 or 6, which is much more manageable for any IT team. No team can address millions, especially with all the lost time on, you know, false leads and things like that. So there is that positive. But Michael, I mean, you're 100% right on you start thinking the deep fake and am I really talking to the person? So we're now starting to see, you know, the use of a passphrase or someone, you know, what's your teddy bear's name when you were 6? Some kind of personal information, or even when you call in now for some banks, they, you know, what's the secret code, even after you've authenticated yourself, they still want that, you know, additional layer of protection. So yeah, I agree.
Awesome, thank you. We had a question from Chris who asks, can you talk about the feasibility of air gapping?
In what sense? Air gapping what?
Assuming security, I'll let him could
Sure.
fill in more on that question, and we'll continue on and get back to it. How about that? So all good on AI points. But the pushback that I heard from the attorney, the managing partner of the firm, and it was a sizable firm, said, well, you know what, there may be bad actors that are trying to get to us, but I have an IT firm. I hired an IT firm. We have an IT firm in-house. We have one that consults with them. And that's enough, right? Like that's more than enough. We have an IT firm that we're good. So I'll, Mike, you're shaking your head. I'll let you answer this question first.
I just have to say for those out there who think, yes, of course, we have a help desk and we have, a vendor that is responsible for IT. They're generally going to be the first level. They maybe it's a lawyer who notices an anomaly and then notifies them, and that IT vendor may be the first response. The problem is that the issues concerning security, what logging's been enabled, what types of investigative tools you're going to want to put into play. That's not really an IT. Some IT vendors have that expertise, but it's going to be more like someone like Jeff's firm, or there's a number of IT vendors out there who are very security specific. The notion of building an IT infrastructure, which for law firms has traditionally been all about convenience. The managing partner who demands why it is that I can't, get my email, at a certain point in time, or wants to do something that really may be completely against sort of good security hygiene, or, they want to work on a brief from the Bahamas at a hotel Wi-Fi. All those things that lawyers sort of demand for the ease of their job are in many ways contrary to good security practices. And the IT firm will generally tell you, they'll enable those functions. But and they may even say that's a bad security, that's a security risk, but generally your standard vendor is just going to be trying to implement your desires. And of course, we all know lawyers who are very demanding in terms of, I want to be able to work on this when I want to work on it, from where I want to work on it. And that's probably contrary to good security measures. And so that's why you need a firm like Jeff's, who's going to come in, and we're going to get to it, do those types of gap assessments. And maybe we could talk about air gapping in that section, but that's the type of thing where your general IT firm, I'm telling you, they'll all say they can do that, but that's not what their expertise is.
Yeah, and I agree. I think the assessment is a good place to start, and that can include your team. Whether it's internal, full-time employee or employees, or a firm, or some combination. The assessment really is where you are versus where you think you are, and even where you want to be. And the results of that become the action plan. Some of that's going to balance in your tolerance for risk. So some of the things Michael was talking about, there is a trade-off from operational convenience to security. So how tolerant are we of relaxing some policies to allow for the CEO to access his brief in the Bahamas? What's the impact if we do that? Up against, we can make this Fort Knox and no one can do anything, and then operations shut down. So it's really understanding the business and finding out, what's the right balance, and then keeping operations and security somewhat in balance as we move forward. Because if you let one get too far in front of the other, it may prove challenging for security to catch up, or it could choke the company where operations aren't running. But I think in the question though, is it enough to hire a firm? I mean, it could be, but how do you know the firm you have is able to do the things that they say they can do? So to Michael's point, there are IT operational focused MSPs, managed service providers, and then there are those service providers that have that security flavor. So like our firm, for instance, we can do all the normal blocking and tackling, desktop help desk things. We're just looking at it from a security lens. We're coming at it more from a strategic position. And in many cases, we wind up managing on-site teams, or at least to some degree. So we're leveraging internal resources, just maybe picking up that security layer that they aren't as comfortable with. If I'm a smaller firm or a smaller company, I may not have budget to go hire more than one or two resources on the IT side. So what do I hire? I could hire, I'm going to need a help desk type person, most likely, to, fix printers and things like that. But what's the second hire? And if you say a security resource, the umbrella of security is very wide. So to get one single resource that would know enough about everything or most things to really protect you is challenging, and I think will probably prove unsuccessful and a little frustrating. So that's where, you know, a firm could be an option for you, because you may be picking up fractional resources across a gamut of skill sets that then augment, you know, your on-site staff, or, you know, if you don't have an on-site staff, could potentially replace it. But I think really interrogating, and I think just like your software vendors and your hardware, you should be you know, evaluating your any third party that you're dealing with on some type of regular cadence, annually, every couple of years, whatever your contract term may be. But making sure that, you know, how do they stay up to speed on these trends? How are they keeping up with the latest, these questions that Katherine's bringing up? How is your firm staying on top of these things? What do they do to get smart? Is the way we frame it. So it could be enough. Likely it isn't, without, you know, a fair amount of work, and then you obviously have to have the internal expertise to be able to validate that they're doing what they say they're doing.
And that's the thing, just to echo Jeff's point. I mean, they're your vendor. They're paid monthly, and generally, you know, they have sold you on a suite of security services that may be adequate and may not. And so what you need is, like any sort of, you know, good business risk assessment, is you need a third party to say, well, is that security suite actually adequate? Because as lawyers, 99% of us don't speak tech, right?
Right.
And don't
Right.
know if the security services, whether, you know, the tools that they're utilizing and whether or not they're implementing zero trust or policies like that, whether or not that's really adequate across the organization. And so unless you have at least an occasional audit, like, you know, by someone like Jeff's firm, you're not going to know whether what you're getting is really scaled to what you want to be happening in terms of your security environment.
So, Mike, are you suggesting that firms hire an outside auditor outside of their IT firm?
I think it's important for them to do that on occasion. I'm not saying that it's something they need to do annually,
Right.
but I think it is something that needs to happen. Law firm managing partners are very narrowly focused on the bottom line, just like
Right.
every businesses. It's a cost. It's not something that, you know, shows up in terms of overall receipts at the end of the year. However, what I will say is that it is very short-sighted, especially in this day and age, to think of this as simply a cost. State bars across the country are now implementing ethical rules that require customers to be, consumers, clients to be notified. If in fact there's a breach, there are ethical consequences for the lawyers. If in fact the law firm is breached and not implementing some form of best practices. So it's an overall protective measure of the business environment, similar to making sure that you have safes, you know, safes that close and lock, and doors on your perimeters that lock, and that you're taking care of your client files in the way they should be.
You mentioned it being a cost, but what's the cost of paying ransom for a hack, right? What's the cost if you do get hacked? What's the cost to the firm when you have to tell your clients that you were hacked, right?
Yeah, you think of an assessment, there could be, in some assessment cases, there's a quantitative piece where you're looking at, you know, operational cost and how long you can tolerate being down, and what does down mean.
Right.
But all those things, you can get to, you know, some numbers and really understand the impact. If I'm down a day, or if I'm down a week, or if I'm down 2 weeks, what's the meteor that's, you know, the planet killer versus inconvenient. And again, that's where that tolerance, and there's going to be a budget component to that, but what can the organization tolerate? All of these things factor into this assessment, which then should lead into some kind of action plan, or, you know, part of that evaluation of your current protection. But I think those types of things are important, and that's what, you know, those folks focused on bottom line and things like that. That's what resonates is, hey, if there is an outage and it sustains for 3 days, this is the material cost, much less reputational damage. any other reporting or costs associated with having to hire firms. I don't know what your insurance policy meant. You could be over or underinsured. It doesn't, just because you carry a policy doesn't mean everything is buttoned up and there's no out of pocket for you. These things become very expensive, and you may find yourself not able to renew a policy even after you get breached, especially if you don't take action to correct things. So there's a lot of impact that this could happen beyond, I just can't get into my computer for a couple of hours. I mean, this thing could have months long impact where, we were talking earlier about having to respond to some disclosure requirements by state, and in some cases that lingered for months, and we're trying to put pieces back together while having to respond to state agencies about breached information. So it is a distraction as well for your IT team. So there's any number of ways that this type of event could impact your organization. And I think the reputational one is maybe a little harder to quantify, but it should be taken into account, because if you're, especially as a law firm, if you get breached, you may lose my trust and you may lose my business.
Right.
And and reputation is key for all companies, and I think for law firms especially.
Yeah. No, 100%. I mean, trust is key when it comes to hiring your attorney. You work with the attorney that you trust. And when your data gets breached, it puts that into question. And then you mentioned cost. Well, being down for attorneys that bill hourly, being down even for 1 hour, when you times that by the number of the attorneys at the firm and the hours that they're not billing, it gets costly. It's kind of a scary proposition at that point. So the first thing that I often hear from friends, clients, everybody in between is, oh no, something's happened. Ooh, geez, who do I contact? I need to talk to the FBI. Like that's I want to talk to the feds. I want to report this to someone that's going to be able to, take some action and bring these bad actors, get my information back, get it under control, and really get this in order. So who actually do you reach out to? It's not quite the FBI first. Who should you reach out to? And I'll let you take that one on, because you certainly have seen this before.
Oh, I've seen it before. And when I was the chief of the cyber section in the U.S. Attorney's Office, I would get calls from businesses saying, "We've been hacked, so we're calling you. What can you do for us?"
Right.
And unfortunately, what we can do for them right then and there is very little. And so what I would have to say to them is, well, do you have an incident response plan? And we can talk more about that. And you need to get your organization, your key sort of decision makers aligned and take the next step, which is, get the IT team to brief you immediately. And this is one point that I think that is important, at least from my standpoint, when I'm quarterbacking these types of situations, is I want my investigators in there as soon as possible. I don't want to wait and delay even 48 hours before I have a good investigative team in the network looking at what's going on, because I know that they're going to be looking and deploying the right types of tools to, first of all, remediate, like get us stable, get us in a position where we can function, make sure there's no exfiltration of data, and then put us in a position where we can operate. And then I want to know sort of what do we need to do in order to make sure that the door is closed completely. And then I want to look at what's gone. What was the overall attack? Where were our vulnerabilities? And at some point, which is probably maybe days, if not months down the road, then I'm going to go to law enforcement, because a lot of small businesses say, oh, well, I'm going to call LAPD or LA sheriffs or the equivalent in your state. But the fact is that they don't have the resources to incident respond. They're going to look to the business to do it. Unfortunately, businesses, small, medium, and large these days, are on the front lines of attacks from all over the world. And you are the one who is responsible for your own kingdom. If you need to pull up the drawbridge, it's going to be you. There's going to be no one else that's going to be responsible for doing that. If you have insurance, some of that may be covered, but that may also take time to figure out the extent of your insurance. but you need to gather your key decision makers so that you have a coordinated response to making sure that you are functional and that this attack is being addressed.
Yeah, and from our perspective, there's there's a couple of IR paths. One would be more disaster oriented, and that has its own response path, which is typically recover or restore from backups. And then there is a true incident response where we're been ransomed. You're not typically going to go directly to your backups because those could be compromised. So there's other ways to look at offline sources and things like that to recover from. Mike alluded to, there's a chain of custody component. Think of this as a crime scene, because it is. If you let your IT team loose, they could destroy evidence that part of this is you want to learn from it. You want to know how the actors got in. And if you come in a little too heavy and a little too forceful, you could mess up the crime scene, so to speak, dirty it up. So there really is a little bit of an art to this, but you want to balance containment of the event to the kind of planning and what we're going to go do, and then the execution of that recovery. There's got to be a little bit of a balance. It does happen fairly quickly, but knowing who to call and at what point do you call them? Has IT verified that this is limited to one device? Does that warrant the CEO waking up at 2 a.m? Probably not. If we have a system-wide attack and all servers are down, that's a completely different event. So I think there's some scale in here too that we need to think about. But this really is a team effort to come up with this plan. What is the event we're responding to? At what level do we start to bring folks in, and who are we bringing in, and in what order? And then make sure that you have out-of-band communication, which is important. So you're not going to rely on traditional, especially in a ransom attack. I'm not sending emails to Michael and asking for guidance. We're taking this offline to cell phones or some other Slack channel or something like that to communicate. So make sure you've thought about how are we going to communicate in this type of event, because we do need to talk to each other, but traditional means may be compromised. And you could have a threat actor sitting there watching the response plan unfold, and staying one step ahead of you and persist in the environment. So there's a lot of things to think about when you're going into this. And this, I think, is a great area to bring in a third party, like Michael and his team that have this experience, because there's a lot of things, if you haven't gone through this, to think about and consider. And some may sound a little crazy, but it happens. We've seen it. We've come across recovery efforts where the threat actor is actively participating as a person in the company, and it took a few days to figure out, well, this isn't who we thought it was, and you're giving away all the secrets of how you're trying to defeat them. So those types of things are real. But I think reaching out, bringing in that expertise to think about the different ways that you could have an event, and then how you would respond to said event is a key to any organization.
And just to echo some of those comments, I mean, one of the things that I've drafted response plans for all types of organizations, and one of the things we constantly tell the organizations is you have to tabletop. You have to practice in order to understand how communication gets bogged down when you're in the throes of a crisis. Maybe it's something as catastrophic as your network is just down. And you have to understand what steps you need to take under the threat of the stress of those types of circumstances, so that you are adept at implementing your plan. I'll tell you a lot of things that in terms of sort of the first steps, you got to know where your data is. There are so many delays that happen in incident response planning, and sort of in the development of the plan, and then the tabletopping of the plan, and just understanding where your data is flowing from, and then being able to respond, to have key decision makers and understanding who those are across your organization.
Yep. And if you're thinking about that recovery, there's the data component, and then there could be an application. In what order do we stand up application? What is our asset inventory around our software and our tooling? And that could shift depending on time of the month. If you've got a payroll obligation, you've got contractor hourly workers, that may be top of the list to get folks paid so they don't abandon ship. or it could be an ERP, or email is always a tool that's overlooked, but that is a business application. What are the order of importance? For oil and gas clients, it's a lot of their engineering apps and things like that. That's their money. But thinking about what runs your organization, what's key, how long could it be down? What's the order of standing these things back up? And that helps factor in and drive this response plan as well. So there's this communication within the organization. There's potentially at what point do we go outside of the organization and have to, have some kind of public disclosure? Do we have to engage law enforcement? But there's also this returning to operations path, which is, what is basic infrastructure that we have to have in place to run the organization? What are those key applications? Who are the key people that need to get into those applications first? You may not want to turn on your ERP and let everyone in all at once. You may want to control access. So who are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people that need to get in first, and what do they need access to? So it really is a fairly complex conversation. And to Michael's point, the tabletop piece, that's your fire drill. You're running through it, you're exercising, you're mustering at the right point and testing this out. And you're going to get it wrong a couple of times, and you learn from that, and you go back and you tweak it. But don't let the first exercise of that plan be, in a real scenario. You don't want those that any failures to pop their heads on the first run, for sure, in a live event.
Yeah. I'm going to go to the next question. I'll also go to Kevin's question in 1 second. So I was just going to add, as an individual who works with a firm that works on crisis management and crisis cases, I will say that I have personally seen the smartest of business owners, smartest of attorneys, those that you would normally say are cool under pressure, cool in the courtroom, cool in every instance. But when they are in crisis, we become as humans emotional wrecks who do not think properly and oftentimes make pretty bad decisions or try to make bad moves. So definitely incident response plans are key. The next question was, who needs to create the plan? And Kevin's question was, do we happen to have a sample outline of an IRP? I'm going to go to Jeff.
We have templates that we drive off of, but this is it's somewhat custom to your organization, but there are some basic things that are listed here, an understanding of your infrastructure, what do you have in the environment, in what order does it need to stand up? And again, you're talking about who you contact and when. Those are all things that are fairly templatized, and not all of it may be relevant to your organization, but there certainly are some templates that you can find. But I find it more beneficial, kind of an organic process to walk through and have some of that guidance, but really in interviewing the clients and understanding, what drives their business, what's more important. But we certainly have some templates that we can fall back on to develop it. But if the question is, do we have one available? I don't have one to show right now, but we do have them. Yeah.
Sample outline was the question. Sample outline.
Okay.
Yeah. You can find them on the internet, and certainly we have them. I think Jeff's point is a good one, though. It's one thing to just gather sort of the names and leaders of each department. That's sort of a first basic step, and making sure you do know who to call at the FBI if you get to the point of saying that, you want to report this. But it is very organization specific. I remember a time when incident response plans were, just coming into vogue, and you would get these 20-page incident response plans. Those aren't helpful in an emergency situation. So I think the art of drafting incident response plans has also changed. But yeah, there's certainly plenty of templates.
Yeah, and I think, thinking back, just some of the fundamentals that would feed into this plan and really are just help. Understand the assets in your organization, and that anything that transmits data, that could be a tool, that could be a hardware, a physical device, it could be a person. If you don't know what you have in your environment, you don't know how to protect it, you don't know what needs to be recovered or how to stand things back up. So regardless, the incident response plan sometimes can be a little further down the path for folks, but as a fundamental first step for any organization, asset inventory and asset management is a challenge for every organization. So if you're smaller, it's a little easier, at least in theory, but again, that's a starting point for anything, and that will certainly be one of the things that feeds into your IR or any kind of response plan. So that's something that everyone on the call could do today, is start to gather that list of assets and what you have and who has it and things like that. That's going to be helpful no matter what direction you take.
Awesome, thanks guys. Sorry, my PowerPoint's now messing up again, but it's all right. Our actual next slide was opening to Q&A. We've been taking questions and we've been answering them throughout. I did though want to touch on, and we're coming up on time, I did though want to touch on AT&T. So AT&T is the big news of the week. Their data hack is certainly top of mind. Mike, if you want to maybe talk a little bit in just a moment, I don't think we've seen fully what will be the outcome of this hacking, but if you want to kind of maybe touch on it a second, I don't want to spend too much time on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's too premature. Obviously, we know that listen, any huge repositories of consumer information are going to be targets. They're not immune. Verizon got hit, T-Mobile got hit. I think it's just part of the environment we live in. So in terms of what the impact is, it may be very little for the ordinary consumer, but it doesn't make anyone feel better that that data is out there in the wild.
Great. And then
just some of the early
finally, I
stuff that
had
I've
one
seen,
question. Sorry,
Catherine,
go ahead.
is there could be a third party factor here, and that's something that's probably its own topic. But if you think of your organization and all the protective controls you're putting in place, you know, it's also everyone you're doing business with, and what's their level of hygiene and protection. Because, you know, if they get breached and send a legitimate email, you know, that's another path for compromise. Is it may be a legitimate email from a legitimate sender, but that sender may be compromised. So knowing who you're doing business with as best you can and try to manage those risks is a whole nother, probably another topic. But that's when we're kind of talking through these things. That usually is one of the last things that organizations think about. But highly critical for all organizations. Just again, who are you doing business with? What kinds of things are they doing? And those disclosure requirements between you and your vendors.
Yeah. That's was actually going to be my last question. So, and that somebody had posed earlier, but also ties back in. As a company, we do marketing, we do public relations, we do communications for over 40 law firms in the US. And I will tell you right now that not a single one has ever asked me about our data security processes. If we have insurance, cyber insurance, what do we do, right? And we're managing, to be quite honest, it's going to open myself up to knock on wood, but you know, sensitive information and communications on behalf of these firms, and we're an outside vendor, right? So just thinking through it, and some of these are large international firms as well. It's not just, we're not walking with solos. So the vendor question was going to be my last point, is that we talk about employees as being a weak link, but you know, law firms work with vendors. And Mike, you pointed out earlier the database hack and how that impacted different law firms. And so my question was going to be, what questions, if any, should law firms be asking their vendors? And I'm sure there's an array of questions, but just top line, what basic questions should any law firm, when they're taking a look at their vendors, be asking them? And I'll go with Mike.
Well, the first thing is, first of all, a lot of those terms are going to be in the contract itself, but a lot of incidents that I've seen, of course, they don't come through the front door, they come through the side door, which is the vendor. And you need to ask your vendors about, you know, whether or not they're certified, whether or not they're following NIST standards, what best practices they've implemented to ensure security in terms of the transmission method of information from you to them and back and forth. And you need to know about their general, just everyday basic cyber hygiene. How are they implementing it?
And I think going back, Catherine, to the question earlier that Michael responded to on the should you engage or is engaging an IT partner enough? I mean, who's more desired than maybe a law firm other than an MSP, some type of IT provider that has tens, 20s, hundreds of clients that they're doing IT work for and likely have the right level of credential So I
Right.
think MSPs are a target. And I think understanding if you do engage a third party on the IT side, what are they doing to protect not only you, but themselves, so that you don't become collateral damage. And then ask for evidence. If they're talking, if you're paying for a service like backups and recoveries and things like that, and they're running tests, show me the test, show me the results, show me you did the work you're doing. Because more often than not, what we've come in and seen is, well, our provider told us they were, running backups and testing those backups. And again, you don't want that to be a discovery point during a ransom event where you find out that those backups haven't actually run for the past 6 months and there's nothing to recover. We've seen that too. So I think anyone who, not just a direct vendor, but think about anyone who may have access into your systems, or an administrative credential, could be a third party, like again, an ERP, or any tooling that you may be using. If there's data sharing or if they're connecting in, protecting them from your internal environment and controlling their level of access, all those kinds of things are extremely important.
And I would just add one thing that just actually is top of mind, because I have a client who's been impacted by it. Their systems, employee benefits portal was hacked, and it was administered by a third party. And one of the issues that came up was my client, who had contracted for the service, was like, well, why did you wait months to notify us? And I went back to the original contract and found they had no obligation other than general reporting requirements, statutory requirements, to notify them at all. And so that is a problem. And that is something you can contract around and make sure that you're higher up on the food chain in terms of information than sort of the back.
Good point. Awesome. Yep. I think the final question that we have here is a question about CLE for the conversation. We're actually in the process. We've submitted it to the Florida bar. If anybody has other bars that they want us to submit to, let us know. And so we're in the process of trying to gain approval for it, and we'll advise everybody when we do. So the answer is perhaps it's coming. So
Catherine, do we get a clarification on the air gap question? Just
we did not. Did you want to go
Okay.
back to that one before we wrap up?
yeah, I mean,
We can
I
talk
don't
about
know what we're air
Oh,
gapping.
sorry, we did. I'll back that. The clarification was, I missed it. Air gap, physical air space around a system, not online, was the clarification. And the question, just as a reminder, was, can you talk about the feasibility of air gapping?
Yeah, I guess it certainly depends on the system you're trying to protect. I mean, air gapping in and of itself can be effective. It always is going to come down to identity and access, to some level. So even with air gap, there's a potential. It could be less likely. We in our world, in the oil and gas world, there's a lot of SCADA, that type of data that we typically will air gap or siphon off electronically or technologically, and keep it distanced from everything else. Those have their own ecosystem, their own protective controls. Again, air gapping in a law firm, I would probably want to understand that a little better. It's certainly an approach. I don't know, it could have an operational impact. I just would probably need to understand that before. I don't want to answer that definitively, but it's a good question to probably explore a little bit.
I'll just add real quick. I've seen an attempt. Air gapping is very common in the national security context. When I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office, for obvious reasons, I've seen law firms try to air gap sort of very, crown jewels like patent data. The problem is that at some point, when that data comes onto systems that are connected to the internet, then of course the vulnerability exists. So it's functionally and in concept, yeah, it is a way to sort of keep the vault closed. But the problem is, at some point, it's going to have to be utilized and manipulated, and it gets dicey from there.
I would probably put my focus and emphasis on the identity and access piece, just really emphasizing and controlling who is getting into it, and certainly put some alerts, and maybe there's some extra alerting around the crown jewels. If someone's accessing it, or if it's moving, or being touched at all, I want to know immediately. And again, talking about an IR plan, that may have a different response than just, someone looks like they may have gotten my email password. Again, that all factors into that bigger conversation. But identity and access, I can be anyone from anywhere. at any time. So I want to make sure that the right people have the right access at the right time. So I would probably put my focus there.
And then 30-second add-on to that, which is very important that Jeff raised, is the concept of least access or least restriction, which is sort of a generalized concept in information security. You want to make sure that only the people who need access have access.
Right.
And so that is a fundamental principle across your platform that you need to implement, and not all organizations, and especially law firms, because again, it's about efficiency and use, actually implement that.
Awesome. Yeah, good point. Awesome. Well, after the webinar wraps up, we were going to send around a recording to all the participants, and we will also send around both Mike and Jeff's contact information for follow-up questions. If you want to talk more about air gapping, I'm sure we can follow up with emails on that as well. And thank you both for attending and for speaking and for giving all those wonderful insights. It was a really good conversation, and I want to thank everybody, for those that attended, for being on with us this afternoon, morning. Of course, as I mentioned, feel free to email any follow-up questions, and I will make sure that we send the CLE information once it gets approved. So thank you both, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.